Alright everyone, welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video with Fat Phil, and today we're going to be talking about the phases of Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. This is a topic that I have visited a few times, and I think for 2025, I have some big changes to what I would consider each phase of SWGOH. Where does your account fit in? One of the biggest things you need to understand is the importance of what this means, particularly when you ask me for advice. I like to know what phase of the game you think you're in, and then I can kind of give you what phase of the game I think you're in. The phasing of a game, knowing where your roster sits in terms of the general Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes landscape, is extremely important. Because if you think you're in the mid game, the advice, if you're in the mid game, the advice I have for you is going to be very different than you're in the late game or the early game or the end game, because there's different needs of your account. There's different expectations around what you should be doing. And especially now that Lightspeed bundles exist where you can be buying things, that progress your account pretty far out, we need to look at them and kind of say, hey, you know what? We can't just use galactic power. Because GP is, this galactic power, I think pre-Lightspeed bundles used to be a very good indication of where your account was. Nowadays, that's not really the case, because you could have 8.5, 8 million GP with 1 or 2 GLs and nothing else, or you could be 8 million GP with like 5 Galactic Legends. It's all about how your account has been crafted, how did it get there, and what's in it. So we're going to be looking at that, and then I'm going to try to take this sort of series, this guide, and give you some advice in each of those different areas, whether you're end game, tip of the spear, mid game, late game, wherever the hell you sit. I'm going to try to come up with advice for you as it relates to the game in 2025. So let's give a shout out to our channel members for their continued support. If you guys are ever interested, y'all know where that link is. It's down below, along with a link to Discord. Go check that out. Thank you again for the faith, believing, even just being there in the Discord sometimes, and I'm like, guys, what do you need me to talk about? What the hell do you want to see a video on? I really appreciate it. Y'all are the best. Let's get in here. Let's discuss the phases of Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes in 2025. Alright, so the first phase. It's not even a phase. You're just the FNG, right? If you need to, you can go on Urban Dictionary and look up what FNG stands for. But you're starting with the basics, right? Like the old farming guides that I used to do for 2024 and everything. This is kind of where you would start at, right? You're not in the beginning of the game yet. This is like pre-level 85. You're just building your account. And the reason why I'm calling this its own phase, I'm calling it out, is because in the past, it used to take months to get to level 85. And so during that time, you'd be able to play through the game at a slower pace. You learned a lot about your account. That process has sped up exponentially. And so you're thrust into an account that's level 85 long before you're actually a seasoned veteran of SWGOH. You haven't been playing the game very long, and yet here you are at level 85. So at that point, you're just kind of in the beginning. You're not even in the beginning yet. You're just kind of in this like tutorial phase of SWGOH, right? So you're just starting with the basics at that point. You're building your early, those early teams. The damage you can do to your account in this phase is much less than it used to be, because this is a shorter time span. Back when it was months, if you did something wrong for months and built the base of your account wrong, you were screwed. Now, mistakes that were made early are much easier to rectify. So don't feel like if you do one thing wrong, you're setting your account back for forever. That's not the case. So yeah, you're going to start with the basics there. A lot of the farming guides, even from 2023, the beginning steps of those up until maybe the first Galactic Legend and GL ship are still going to be very, very solid and really important for you to follow and hold water to this day. Then you get to the beginning phase, right? The beginning phase is when your roster finally has an identity. And by an identity, what I would refer to in this case is I can open up your account and very quickly identify what you're working on. Think about going for Executor. I would expect to see the pilots and the crew members at relic levels, the bounty hunter ships. And that, why I say roster identity is once you get that first or second farm, your roster kind of gets muddled a little bit, right? It gets muddier to figure out, all right, well, what did you do first and where are you going? Because there's so much, right? But in the beginning, it's very easy to quickly determine, all right, this is an Executor rush. You're going for Jabba, you're building Bo-Katan, whatever the case is, it's there, right? This phase, in my opinion, ends at the culmination of the end of that first Galactic Legend or GL ship farm, whether it's Jabba, Executor, whatever your first, and you'll hear me use the term major farm. Just to define a major farm, we're going to give you like 3 options of a major farm in this particular journey guide, and that's your GL ships, Executor, Profundity, Leviathan. Those are major farms. And then you have your GLs. They're also major. The only other one that kind of exists on its own, in my opinion, is Jedi Knight Luke. I think maybe even General Skywalker to that regard, those two kind of exist in their own little bubble of, medium, farms. And everything else, in my opinion, is a minor farm. And minor just means that the requirements aren't that steep. Like, even Bo-Katan, you could say, oh my gosh, Phil, it's like 4 Relic 7s, or, Balin is 5 Relic 7s, that's kind of hard, right? When you're only talking about a small number of characters, even if you do have to Relic them, it's not nearly as challenging, particularly in the earlier stages of the game, when it's harder to get Relic materials than it is to get signal data. So, again, that's where your major farm, Executor, Profundity, Leviathan, or a Galactic Legend. So just want to make sure we get that before we get too far. So that, again, the beginning stage of the game will end at the culmination of that first GL, or GL ship. And then you get into the early game. Now, the early game is one that I changed up a good bit here. This is where you're kind of doing some of those, I'd say, obvious farms, and I still have Starkiller here. I have a very interesting tidbit that I will share later on in another video about that, so just keep that in mind. But we've also got Inquisitors. Again, I think Inquisitors are still something that you should be farming in that early game. The earlier you get them, I think they're continuing to prove their worth. So it is an important situation, particularly for a lot of players as you're getting into Rise of the Empire. That's going to, Reva is becoming something that I feel players are trying to get earlier and earlier, and that's a good sign. The early game, you're kind of continuing on either with some of these minor farms that are the popular minor farms like Starkiller, Grand Inquisitor, or you're continuing on with your Galactic Legends like Jabba, where he has a lot of overlap with Jedi Master Luke and Leia Organa. So you're not really starting a major farm from scratch yet. You're still kind of continuing with where you've already made investments. And at this point in the early game, what's going to start to happen is you'll cross over that 4 million threshold. You'll get into proving grounds, hard mode conquest. This phase, you'll begin to transition out of it as you're getting closer to completing proving grounds for a character. And I'd say at the very minimum, at the very end of it, right, the longest you could end up being in an early game, in my opinion, is the unlock of your first proving grounds character, not out of a Lightspeed bundle. So if you bought the Commander Tano bundle or, TIE Interceptor bundle, I can't count those as a proving ground unlock, because I'm talking about you either spent the crystals or you spent the time getting that character. That would be the complete, last time you could end the early game. And I know a lot of you are about to come at me in the comments and say, Phil, I'm 8 million and I don't have a proving grounds character yet. Lightspeed bundles have bloated your account. If you were following a free-to-play farming guide, this is kind of where your account would fit in. And I said that that's the very maximum. So you could get to out of the early game before you have a proving grounds character unlocked through some of those other facets. But that's kind of a good place for a lot of free-to-plays to use, is that first unlock of a proving grounds character. You've spent your Galactic Legend tokens, took the time, great job. You can kind of start to move out of it. And that's where kind of the mid-game begins, right? Again, those LSBs don't count. The mid-game begins when you start to work on some of those things in the journey guide that you're starting from scratch. That at this point, most of the things in the journey guide, you're starting from ground zero. Again, there's still a couple of things that have overlap. Like, for example, General Skywalker to Jedi Master Kenobi. There's some overlap there. Or overlap with GL Ahsoka, Lord Vader. There's a little bit of overlap, but most things, you're starting from ground zero. that you don't have like a massive head start. Think about like Jabba, Leia, JML. There's so many, even the Executor there. There's some overlapping farms that all kind of really tie in nicely. The mid-game begins when you no longer have those to do, and you're starting to build into more of those I start from scratch. I'd say a lot of my subscriber base, a lot of my channel members are in the mid-game, where they are beginning to work on those journey guide things, where they're starting them from scratch. There's not the overlap anymore, and you're working through your Proving Grounds, beginning to take advantage of those first few Proving Grounds characters. In my opinion, the mid-game will end when Box 6 in Conquest is hit consistently without a lot of additional effort. And what I mean by additional effort is you're not having to, I'd say one, it's consistency. Not meaning like one character. I'm talking that you need, like, I'd argue almost a whole year. But I'd say like 2 or 3 Conquest units, a couple of months of, hey, I'm consistently getting Box 6, and I'm not stretching my account to the point of I'm sweating on the 14th day to finish a few feats. That you're pretty comfortably getting Box 6 in hard mode Conquest. That's when the mid-game kind of ends, in my opinion. Because at that point, you're no longer relying on Proving Grounds to unlock new characters. Now, that doesn't mean that you might not still have Proving Grounds characters to unlock, but for Jocasta, Ezra Bridger Exile, Darkside Rey, these past few units, you haven't had them go to Proving Grounds, so you're getting them when you need them. That's, in my opinion, when the mid-game will end. And why I have Supreme Leader Kylo Ren and Rey here, just kind of a side note, is because these are units that really are very easy to farm, that rely heavily on Proving Grounds characters. And so in that mid-game, you're trying to optimize your roster to say, hey, Rey can use Commander Tano, Ezra Bridger Exile, and Ben Solo. Kylo has Darkside Rey. I'm going to build those units while waiting to do some of these other ones later that take far more relics and also need Proving Grounds units. So, and that's kind of where we're getting next with the late game. The late game is when you are building some of those older Journey Guide units. They've been around for a while. Maybe it's like your Afra or Jar Jar, depending. Obviously, Jar Jar's still kind of, it's still relevant now because of the Naboo raid, but Afra, not a lot of relevance there. But it's easier than farming some of the newer stuff. It's more accessible to you. You're wrapping up those Journey Guide things to get closer and closer to the newest releases in the game. The late game also is where you start to have a little bit more recency bias with your farming, meaning that maybe you're not farming the brand new stuff. Maybe you haven't started farming Spectre yet, but you've got your Battle for Naboo characters, or you built the new Imperial remnants for their assault battle kind of thing. Like, that's where I'd say the late game, when you're in that point, is that recency bias is where you're farming. That maybe you don't have to farm the Gungans because you've already built them. You just have to equip the gear. You already have all the characters you need for Lord Vader. You just haven't done all the relic levels, or you haven't done, Kyrotex for some of them. Similar situation with Kenobi. You have all the pieces, you just don't have the gear. That's kind of the late game there, that you're farming shards now is far more into the new stuff, and it's just gear, right? And again, that gear does eventually start flowing, and you progress your account, and it gets easier and easier. But that's kind of where the late game is, in my opinion. That you're finishing off those final few things in the Journey Guide that aren't the brand new stuff, but still take a lot of work to do. And then the end game. And the end game transition sort of happens as the recency bias gets closer and closer. You'll begin to see where it's like, hey, I can start farming the Spectre units now. I could start farming, Balin's team now, right? Those are that's end game when the end game happens. The end game does not mean that you are caught up. It just means that you're not far behind. I ran track and field, and if you've ever seen that track, right, it's a 400-meter oval. You're not on the home stretch yet. You're still rounding that turn, right? You're about 150, 130 meters to go. You're coming around that final turn, but you're not on the home stretch yet. That's kind of where the end game lies. You are still you're farming the newest things, but you're not caught up yet, right? You're not far behind, but you're clearly behind, but it's not like you're at the starting line. You've made good progress. It's obvious that you're getting close to those things. You're right there. I would argue that my account is kind of at the tail end of Endgame because we've got some more levels below us. But I would say that this is around where my account is. I'm not on the home stretch yet. I'm behind, but not terribly far behind. In this phase of the game is when you're putting on some of those, I'd say you're starting to expand your roster's quality rather than the quantity. And what I'm referring to there is you're working on relic levels. You are beginning to fill those little gaps that you used to not have before. An example, like a great example from this year already in my actual farms would be like the Luthen and Saw Gerrera team that I built up, right? That I kind of had Luthen sitting around. I finally got Luthen built up. That's kind of what you're doing in this stage of the game, where you are building those teams, you're filling those gaps that are very good but take a significant amount of investment and are not right in your face. That's kind of a good way to describe that. So beyond just building the new things, you're building some of those things that are kind of completely out of the way but are very beneficial to your account. Then you get to the tip of the spear, right? Your tip of the spear players, and this is beyond Endgame. Now, with tip of the spear, there's going to be two kinds of accounts that exist in a tip of the spear. So the first is the tip of the spear accounts where they're primarily blocked by capital games, meaning CG hasn't put enough resources in the game, so they still have some older things to work on, but their primary roadblock to progression is the speed at which CG releases farms. The speed at which they release gear or whatever else, right? So that's kind of where I say my account is in between tip of the spear and endgame, because I don't have the new Bad Batch yet. I still have a lot of old work to do. And while much of my progress could be gated by CG releasing things, I still have a lot of other things I can work on in my account. And so that's kind of, and to show you the two levels of kind of, I'd say, tip of the spear players, I'm going to go to my ally list here and pick on Shitstorm, who I would say is a tip of the spear player with some work to do on his account. So where's Shitstorm at? There he is. So if we go to the bottom of Shitstorm's account, he has the new Bad Batch almost at 7-star and still some older characters to work on finishing out. And yes, he does have a Gear 12 Savage with no Omicron because he doesn't care about GAC. Calling, you guys can roast him in the comments for that. I'm sure he will get a kick out of it because he doesn't care about GAC. He doesn't. But you see that he's primarily gated by capital games, right? That if the Bad Batch was fully farmable, he'd have them, right? He's obviously spending a little bit here to get him to these levels, but giving him the credit here that his primary roadblock to progressing is capital games, right? If capital games release them faster, he'd have them at relic levels. He'd have more gear on these guys. That's kind of where his account is at. And that's also, I'd say, just to show you a similar size account who I would argue is on the other side, is this guy in my fleet arena here, Hassim Elok. Where this guy, very similar size in GP, so a lot of it, what you'll end up seeing is Zetas, but look, every single character at relic levels. Now, obviously this is much more due to growth from some of the light speed bundles. Not saying that's a bad thing, right? We don't judge. But you can tell that there's, not that he hasn't put a lot of investment into this account, because he has, but this is somebody who, all right, CG releases something new, and I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to bring it to Relic 8, right? I mean, look, the whole new Bad Batch is Relic 8. But this kind of account, this is the other kind of tip of the spear. The minute CG releases something, Relic 8, Relic levels, Zetas, Omicrons, mods, everything. These are obviously your, whale of whales, right? And again, there's other guys beyond just him, right? Going into, the guys like Gugek here who spend, they get their stuff, but that he is completely blocked by CG just releasing other things. Look, everybody Relic 7, accounts like this. This is another even level of tip of the spear beyond, Hassim Elok there. Accounts like this, it's I just want Relic 8s, which is awesome. I mean, these are great. Like this guy, what he's doing is awesome. You guys should see the quality of this account. I mean, it's just nuts. I always bring it up. But that's kind of the phases of SWGOH. You guys saw a couple of examples, particularly in the later stages, because these middle stages, right, the early, mid, and late game, it gets pretty muddy. You know, you're like, where am I really at? And so that's why I try not to use what's in your account rather than like, what can your account do? What are you doing at the moment? And you notice, like, for the end game here, the concept with the GLs that you're building is that I would not consider you endgame if you're working on Ahsoka and Baylan and still have things like Kenobi and Lord Vader to finish up. Maybe you don't have, Rey or Kylo, but you're working on Ahsoka like that. You know, again, this is just going based off of, like, release dates and, difficulty of farm. Not necessarily, like, if you built Ahsoka at 6 million GP, I'm not going to fault you. That doesn't make you an endgame player, because you still have all of these other things to build. So I do want to make sure we say that like, just because you're building Ahsoka doesn't mean you're in the end game. You've got to have everything else to support that, right? The end game is you literally only have stuff in the journey guide to work on. There's nothing else you can do. And that's kind of why I say that my account's transitioning to Tip of the Spear, because my journey guide is complete, but I still have a lot of other work that I could be doing to get me closer to that Tip of the Spear level. So that's the end of this video. Let me know your thoughts down below. Like, subscribe, comment. I love you all. May the Force be with you, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, my friends.